a service is something which is intangible and it is inseparable. What do we mean by inseparability? In this inseparability, we should understand that there is simultaneous production and consumption of service. Whatever the services are used by the business in their normal course of operation, that we call it as business services. Hello everyone, I am Purnima, faculty in the Department of Commerce, Vidhyaashram Pre-University College, Temple of Excellence. In this session, I will be having a discussion on the chapter 4 related to business services. Now, let us have a look into the meaning of the word business services. Now, first let us understand what is the meaning of service, and then we'll have a look into what is the meaning of business services. Now, first, let us have this. Services are those economic activities that are intangible and imply an interaction to be realized between the service provider and the consumer. Now, we know that service is something which is intangible. For example, the banking services, the insurance services, warehousing services, etc. So, there are various services which are there, but it is intangible. We cannot see. Just like if it is a product, we can feel the product, we can touch the product, etc. But in case of a service, we cannot see the service. We can just feel the service. Now, services are those separately identifiable, essentially intangible activities that provides satisfaction of wants and are not necessarily linked to the sale of a product or another service. So, these services are separately identifiable. So, if it is a service, it should be separately identifiable and it is an intangible activity. For example, you go to the doctor for treatment. The doctor will prescribe some medicines. We take the medicine and then the treatment is over. So, we can just feel the treatment, the doctor's services, we can feel it, but then we cannot just see it. So, it is an intangible product. Then, that provides satisfaction of wants. So, there is a satisfaction for us. Once we get well, we take the medicines and then once we get well, we get the feeling of satisfaction. Oh, this doctor has cured us of our disease. So, that kind of a satisfaction what we get, so that is through a service. So, a service is something which is intangible and it is inseparable. So, the doctor has to physically examine us and then prescribe the medicine. So, the doctor's services should be taken only when we go there personally, get ourselves examined by the doctor, only then we can avail of the doctor's services. So, his services will be how best he will be diagnosing the patient. So, that is what we mean by the word satisfaction of wants. And there is an interaction to be realized. So, there should be an interaction between the doctor and the patient. And if there is no interaction, then we cannot avail of the services. Then, next, let us have a look into the nature of services. What are the different features of services? So, here there are 5 I's of services. Let us have a look into the first one. The first one is intangibility. Now, what do we mean by intangibility? Services are something which cannot be seen, but it can be only experienced. As I told you earlier, if it is a case of a doctor's services, so we can just experience that feeling of wellness once we consume that medicine. So, it is something which has to be experienced and we cannot see it. So, it is intangible. Service cannot be shown and it has to be just felt or experienced. So, for example, you go on a train journey, then journey which you undertake, that actual experience what you are having, so that is something which we cannot just see, but we can just feel that experience of the train journey. So, that is what we mean by intangibility. Then, the next feature of service is inconsistency. Now, what do we mean by inconsistency? Suppose, for example, if it is a product, like for example, it is a soap. The soap will have a standard size, standard perfume, and it will have a standard look which will be expected by the customer. So, the customer, when he goes and asks for a particular brand of soap, he will know that it is this particular brand of soap by the look, the smell and the fragrance and the feel of it. So, everything he will know it beforehand. But in case of a service, it has to be provided every time the client comes, or whenever a seeker of the service comes. So every time the service has to be actually performed. Only then he can just experience the service. Otherwise, he cannot experience. So every time the service is being performed, it may be of a different type. So the service may be better or it may be worse, so depending on the customer's experience. So we call these services as inconsistent. That is, there is no standard like a product, but then every time the service provider is providing his service, he should see that he is catering to the customer in a better manner. Then, and the next nature of services is inseparability. Now, what do we mean by inseparability? In this inseparability, we should understand that there is simultaneous production and consumption of service. So, whenever a service is being produced, at the same time it will be consumed by the seeker of the service. So, whenever the doctor is giving his doctor services, the patient will be there and he will be subjected to diagnosis by the doctor and he will be healed by the doctor. So, there is a simultaneous production and consumption of service, and as such we cannot separate the producer of the service and also the consumer. So it has to happen both at the same time. Then next one is inventory. So what do we mean by inventory? Inventory means stock of goods. But for a service provider, there is no inventory at all. He will be just providing his services whenever a client comes. So he cannot, just like if it is a finished goods, we can just store it in the godown, and whenever the demand comes, we can just sell the product. But in case of services, we cannot store it. For example, if it is a train journey, so we have booked a ticket from Mysuru to Mangalore. So when we book a ticket from Mysuru to Mangalore, the ticket as such can be stored with us, but then the experience of the journey, that should be taken only when we go there personally by train or somebody else by train. There we have to see that there is no inventory here in case of a service provider. So whatever services he will be giving, and he will be charging a fee for that. For example, if the doctor service, lawyer service, or a chartered accountant service, all these services, so they are inseparable, and as such there is no much stock needed for a service, and we cannot store that services to be consumed at a later date. So we cannot store it. So services have to be consumed simultaneously. And the last one is involvement. In this last feature, we should understand that the customer's participation is necessary whenever the service delivery takes place. So we have to ensure that the customer who is seeking the service, he should be present there personally in order to avail the services which is being offered to him. So the involvement of the customer is essential here. So this is the basic nature of the services. Now let us have a look at the differences between services and goods. Now the first difference is on the basis of nature. It is an activity or process, that is watching a movie in a cinema hall. So that is the service being provided by a cinema hall. But whereas in case of a goods, a physical object, that is the video cassette of the movie. So the video cassette of the movie will be considered as a goods, but then the process of watching the movie will be considered as a service. Then the next one is type. So in case of services, it is heterogeneous. Heterogeneous means whenever each person comes, he will be given a different kind of service. For example, the doctor. So whenever a patient comes, so depending on the type of disease he has, the doctor will be treating the patient. So it is a heterogeneous type of services. But whereas in case of goods, it is homogeneous. Now why we call it as a homogeneous? Whether you just use the soap for anything, so the same use will be there for everybody. So this is the meaning of heterogeneous and homogeneous. Then the next difference is intangibility. Now what do we mean by intangibility? Something which cannot be seen. So here you can see that the doctor's treatment, it is something which is intangible, but we can just feel the doctor's treatment. But the taking the medicine, so when you take the medicine, so medicine is a product, and that when it is being consumed into the body, so that is something which is tangible, and then we get the services. Then the next one is inconsistency. Now what is this inconsistency? So the different customers have different demands, that is mobile services. So here we should understand that the service is different for each person. So for each person, whoever is there, so he will be having a different type of a demand for the service, and based on his demand the service will be provided. But in case of goods, different customers getting standardized demand fulfilled, that is mobile phones. So we have the mobile phones with various features, and whoever wants those features, he can just go and buy that mobile. So in that way the product will be satisfying the customer's demands. Then next one is inseparability. So simultaneous production and consumption. So for example, you eat ice cream in a restaurant. That process of eating the ice cream in the restaurant, so that will be a service, and the ice cream itself, that is the good. So separation of production and consumption, that is purchasing ice cream from a store. So ice cream is a product, and the process of eating the ice cream, that will be a service. Then next one is inventory, that is cannot be kept in stock, that is experience of a train journey. So that is a service. So when you have to go on a train journey, so we have to go on ourselves. So personally we have to go and board the train and then experience the train journey. Otherwise we cannot get the service. But then in case of goods, it can be kept in stock. The goods can be stored until it is sold. So there is separability here. And last one is involvement. So participation of customers at the time of service delivery. So it is essential. Suppose you want to meal in a restaurant. So the way we have to go to the restaurant, order a meal and then eat it, only then our hunger will be satisfied. But whereas in case of goods, involvement at the time of delivery is not possible. So we need not have that. So anybody can go and buy any products whenever they need, and as such the same consumer is not necessary to go and buy the product. So we have the differences between goods and services. Then next, let us have a look at the types of services. In this, the first type is business services. So business services are those services which are used by the business enterprises for the conduct of their activities. So whatever the services are used by the business in their normal course of operation, that we call it as business services. For example, we have the banking service, insurance service, transportation, warehousing and communication services. So they are the various types of business services. Then next, let us have a look into the next type of service, that is the social service. Now what do we mean by social service? So they are those services that are generally provided voluntarily in pursuit of certain social goals. So for the purpose of attaining certain social goals, some services are rendered. So those services are called as social services. For example, healthcare and educational services provided by certain NGOs and government agencies. Now, there are certain weaker sections of the community who are in need of education, who are in need of medical facilities, etc. And these social services will be provided to them, so that the weaker sections of the community, they can get educated and they can also get treatment at a very low cost. Then the next type of service is personal services. Now, what do we mean by personal services? Personal services are those which are experienced differently by different customers. These services cannot be consistent in nature. So, By personal service, we mean that they are different for different customers. For example, take the example of tourism. So when you go on a tour, so each one will have his own experience of the tour which he has undertaken. So it will be differing from one person to another. So that is why we call it as a personalized service. Then recreational services. So you go to a movie. So some people may like the movie, some people may not like the movie. So it all depends on the temperament of that person, and as such, we call all these as personalized services or the personal services. Now, let us have a look into what is the business service. Then, business enterprises look towards banks for availability of funds, insurance companies for getting their plant, machinery, goods, etc. insured, transport companies for transporting raw materials, and finished goods and telecom and postal services for being in touch with the vendors, suppliers, and customers. So as the business services, they have a lot of business activities are necessary, and along with these services only the business activities can be done. Now, for example, the business needs funds for expansion or for the day-to-day running of the business. Also it needs funds, and these funds can be got through the banks, which will be financing these business organizations. Then we also need the insurance companies. Now, why do we need the insurance companies? To see that whatever goods we have produced or whatever assets the business has, it has to be properly protected. So in case of there is any loss or damage to the property, the business will be able to be amply compensated. Then we also need to have the transport companies. Now, why these transport facilities are necessary? To transport raw materials from the place of production to the place of the factory, and also to see that the finished goods which are there, so it will be transported to the place of sale. And then we also need the telecom and postal service. So why we need the telecom and postal service? To keep in touch with our suppliers, with our creditors, with our customers. So for all this, we need a very good communication system which will be provided by the postal services, etc. So these are the various uses of business services. Now, let us see what this slide tells. So today's globalized world has ushered in a rapid change in the service industry in India. India has been gaining a highly competitive edge over other countries when it comes to providing services to the developed economies of the world. So we have seen that after the 1990s, that is after the LPG, India has been emerging as one of the very strongest economic power. Now, why this has been possible? Because of the service sector. So whatever the BPO services which India is providing to all over the world, so that is becoming very, very popular. Here we are having very skilled labor who are able to do the goods, or which are able to provide the services to almost all the countries all over the world at a very competitive rates. So this is the main factor for the success of the service sector in India. Then next, let us look into the first type of service, that is the banking services. Now, we all know that what is banking. Nowadays, the introduction of the digital payment banking system has become all the more important. Or we can also say that the banking system is here to stay. Now, let us have a look into the word banking and what are the different aspects of banking. Now, commercial banks are an important institution of the economy for providing institutional credit to its customers. So, we cannot think of running a business without a banking facility, because most of the commercial banks, they provide financial facilities to almost all the businessmen, and it is just unimaginable to run a society or run a business without a banking facility. Now, let us have a look into what is the function of the bank. A bank accepts money on deposits, repayable on demand, and also earns a margin of profit by lending money. A bank stimulates economic activity in the market by dealing in money. So we should understand that a bank accepts deposits. So whenever you have to just pay the money into the bank, you want to just deposit money in your savings bank account, so the bank will be always ready to accept the money. So what will it do with all its deposits? So whatever deposits it is collecting from all the account holders, it will be lending it a higher rate of interest to the persons who come to the bank for loans. So the interest which is provided to the SB account holders will be lower than the interest charged by the banks to the loan seekers. So in this way, we should understand that a bank stimulates economic activity in the market by dealing in money, or in other words, banks create credit in the economy. Now, next, let us see what are the other functions of the bank. It mobilizes the savings of the people and makes funds available to business financing their capital and revenue expenditure. So the bank will be collecting deposits. So the deposits will be in the form of SB account, or it may be in the form of current account, or it may be in the form of fixed deposit receipts. So in this way, it will be collecting all the money, and whatever money it has collected, it will be lending to those people who come with the loan application. And in this way, the bank will be financing the business. So whether it is the capital or the revenue expenditures, the banks are there to finance the business. Then it also deals in financial instruments and provides financial services for a price, that is interest, discount, commission, etc. So it deals in financial instruments. Now what do we mean by financial instruments? It can be a promissory note, or it can be a bill receivable, or it can be a bills payable, or it can be a simple check. So all these are financial instruments. So whenever there is a trader who wants urgent cash and he has a bill receivable with him, he can easily go to the bank, get it discounted with the bank, and just get the money. The banks will be providing lot of services other than this, accepting deposits and lending money, and for this services it will be taking amount of discount, and then it will be charging interest and also commission for some other services which it is providing. Then let us have a look into what are the different types of banks. Now the different types of banks are, the first one is the commercial banks, second one is the cooperative bank, third one is the specialized bank, and fourth one is the central bank. Now let us have a look into what are commercial banks. Now, commercial banks are institutions dealing in money. These are governed by the Indian Banking Regulation Act of 1949, and according to it, banking means accepting deposits of money from the public for the purpose of lending or investment. So there are two types of commercial banks, the public sector and the private sector banks. Now, commercial banks are those banks which are dealing with money, and there are two types of commercial banks, that is the public sector and the private sector. Now, whenever we mean by public sector, it means that government has a lot of stake in those type of banks. So, for example, the public sector banks are the Canara Bank, the Corporation Bank, etc. So, they are examples for the public sector banks, and now we also have the private sector banks where it is entirely funded by private individuals. Now, what is the act governing this banking? So, it is governed by the Banking Regulation Act of 1949, and according to this act, the bank is any institution which accepts the deposits and lends money to its customers. So, any person or any institution which is engaged in accepting deposits and lending funds, we can call it as a bank. Then, let us have look at what are the public sector banks. So, public sector banks are those in which the government has a major stake, and they usually need to emphasize on social objectives than on profitability. Private sector banks are owned, managed and controlled by private promoters, and they are free to operate as per the market forces. So, there are a number of public sector banks like the SBI, PNB, IOB, etc. and other private sector banks like HDFC, ICICI Bank, Kotak Mahindra Bank and Jammu and Kashmir bank. Now, if you can have a look at the public sector banks, so these banks, the government is the major stakeholder in these banks, and they have the social objective. They give more preference to social objective than to profitability. So we can see that the banks will be lending to the agricultural sector more in case of a public sector banks, but whereas in case of private sector banks, they don't give much loans to the agricultural sector. Now, in case of public sector banks, the government has a social objective, that is for the economic benefit of the people, for the welfare of the people. These public sector banks are there, and they will be providing loans to the priority sectors which are enumerated by the government. But whereas in case of private sector banks like the HDFC Bank, ICICI Bank, they are set up by private individuals and they are mainly there to make profits. Then let us have a look into what are cooperative banks. So cooperative banks are governed by the provisions of the State Cooperative Societies Act and meant essentially for providing cheap credit to the members. It is an important source of rural credit, that is agricultural financing in India. So just like the cooperative society, we have the cooperative banks, and these cooperative banks, they are governed by the provisions of the State Cooperative Societies Act, and this is essentially meant to give cheap credit to its members. Other than that, these cooperative sectors banks are very active in rural areas where it will be giving loans to the agricultural people. The next type of bank is specialized banks. Now, what are specialized banks? So, these specialized banks are foreign exchange banks or industrial banks, development banks, export-import banks, catering to specific needs of the unique activities. So, these banks provide financial aid to industries, heavy turnkey projects, and foreign trade. Now, there are certain specialized banks to finance certain specialized activities. Now, for example, the foreign exchange bank. Now, what is the function of this foreign exchange bank? So, the main function is to see that the foreign exchange, whatever they are getting, the business people, it will be exchanged for the Indian currency. In the same way, we have the industrial banks which will be providing finance for the industrial sector, and then we have the export-import banks. Now, what is the main function of this export-import bank? To look after the financing of the exports and imports of India. So, in this way, we can see that these specialized banks are there to meet the specific needs of unique activities. Now, export and import is a unique activity, and to finance this, we have a unique bank called as the Exim Bank or the Export Import Bank, or we also call it as the Exim Bank. So, these banks provide financial aid to industries and also turnkey projects and foreign trade. Now, let us have a look into what is the meaning of the word central bank. Now, as the image itself suggests, it refers to the RBI. The central bank of any country supervises, controls and regulates the activities of all the commercial banks of that country. It also acts as a government banker. It controls and coordinates currency and credit policies of any country. So, we should understand that the central bank of any country supervises, controls and regulates the activities of all the commercial banks. So, whatever the commercial banks we are having in India, they all come under the RBI, that is the Reserve Bank of India. So, it will lay down the rules and regulations for all the banks, and it has to be followed strictly by all the commercial banks in India. Then it also acts as the government banker. So, banker to the government. We refer to the RBI as the banker to the government, banker to the banker, and also we can see that the RBI or the central bank, it coordinates currency and credit policies of any country. So whenever the credit policy has to be implemented, it will be through the RBI. Then let us have a look into the functions of commercial banks. Now the first function of commercial bank is acceptance of deposits. Now what do we mean by acceptance of deposits? So the deposits, whenever the account holders, they come in, just deposit the money in the bank, the banker cannot refuse. He has to accept the deposits, and these deposits can be accepted in the SB account. So if he wants to deposit money in the SB account, he can come and deposit there, or a current account holder also can deposit money into his current account, or we also have this, the fixed deposit receipts, or any person, if he has some extra money, he can always keep an FD in the bank. So in this way, the bank will be collecting deposits on various accounts from all its customers. So this, whatever the money they have collected on these deposits, it will be carrying a fixed amount of rate of interest, which will be paid by the banker to these deposit holders. And then next function of the banks, that is lending of funds. Now what do we mean by lending of funds? So that is granting loans to the customers. So not only does it accept funds, but also it will be lending funds to the customers. Now whenever a businessman is in need of money, the commercial banks will be always ready to lend funds to its business customers. Then the loans can be in the form of overdraft, cash credit, or any consumer credit, or any other type of personal loans. Then the next type of function of the commercial bank is check facility. Now this is one of the main instruments of a financial instrument of a banking system. Now what is this check facility? It is through this check facility the customer can withdraw the funds whatever he has in his SB account. Now we should understand that there are two types of checks. One is the bearer check and one is the account payee check. Now what do we mean by bearer check? So bearer check is payable across the counter, whereas an account payee check or a cross check should not be paid across the counter. It should be credited to that particular person's account. Now the next function of the banker is remittance of funds. Now the banks will help us in transferring funds from one place to another. This transfer of funds can be done through the bank draft, or we can also transfer funds. Nowadays, with the help of the digital system or the e-banking, we are able to easily transfer funds from one account to another because of greater internet connectivity, and because of the latest technology we are having, we can transfer funds very, very easily. Then next one is allied services. So in addition to all these functions, the banks also provide some allied services. Now let us have a look at what are the allied services given by the banks. In addition to all these functions, the bank also gives certain services to its customers, like payment of the insurance premium. It also offers the locker facilities, collection of rent on behalf of the customers. They also give underwriting services, etc. So these are the various types of other services rendered by the banking to its customers. Then let us have a look at what is the meaning of the term e-banking. So e-banking or internet banking means any user with a PC and a browser can get connected to the bank's website to perform any of the virtual banking functions and avail any of the bank's services. So e-banking. So e-banking means electronic banking. So any person with a PC and a browser. So nowadays we don't need a personal computer also. So through our mobile phones only, we can avail the banking services. So we can go to the bank's website and perform any of the virtual banking functions and any of the bank's services. So whatever the bank services are there, we can avail of those services in our mobile itself. So there is no human operator to respond to the needs of the customer, the bank has centralized database that is web enabled. So whatever the services they will be giving through the e-banking, it will be displayed on the mobile, and you can just click that particular app and you can just avail of those services. Here there is no human operator here, and it is a web enabled database, so which will provide the services to the customer and the comfort of his home. Then next, all the services that the bank has permitted on the internet are displayed on a menu. Any services can be selected and further interaction is dictated by the nature of service. So whatever services are provided over the internet, it will be displayed on the main menu, and we can just log into that menu and get the services. Then these types of services are provided by the banks are called as e-banking. So it lowers the transaction cost, adds value to the banking relationship, and empowers customers. E-banking is electronic banking or banking using electronic media. So this kind of banking facility through the electronic media, we call it as e-banking, and it will lower the transaction cost. Now, why it will lower the transaction cost? So we need not go to the bank. We can just sit at home and do whatever banking we need. So this will be lowering the transaction cost, adds value to the banking relationship. So the banking relationship also will be better when you provide these kind of services to most of the customers. And then it will be empowering the customer. The customer will have the entire bank on his, and he can do any of the service by sitting at his home itself. So e-banking is electronic banking or banking using electronic media. Then let us have a look at what are the e-banking services offered here. So the range of services offered by e-banking are automated teller machines, so that is the ATMs, and point of sales. So that is when at the point of sale you can use your debit card or the credit card and pay the money. Electronic data interchange EDI and credit cards, electronic or digital cash, and electronic bank transfer, that is the EFT. So the two ways in which the EFT is done is through the NEFT, that is National Electronic Fund Transfer, and real-time gross settlement. So there are various kinds of services which are offered by the e-banking. So that is the ATM and the point of sales. That is the ATM machine. So anybody can enter into an ATM kiosk and get the money whatever he needs. And also we have the NEFT and the RTGS facility, which is being provided by the banks for making payments for the benefit of the customers. Now here we have the list of transactions here. So in this we have the goods and services. So and then we have the modes of payment. Either you can pay by cash or you can pay by digital basis, and if it is on a digital basis, you can either pay by the plastic cards, that is the debit card or the credit card, or you can also pay through the e-banking system. Then under the e-banking system, we have the different types. So here we have the point of sale, then we have EPS, or through the UPI also you can say. You can pay through the micro ATM, you can pay, Beam app is there, mobile wallets, prepaid cards. So they are the different kinds of e-banking services which are offered by the e-banking to the online business. So this online business is gaining lot of momentum, and e-banking has revolutionized this online business. Now let us have a look at the benefits of e-banking to the customers. So what are the benefits? So e-banking facilitates digital payments and promotes transparency in financial statements. Now through the e-banking, we can do digital payment and also the transparency in financial statements. Why? Because whenever the amount is being debited to your account, immediately you get an SMS message saying that such and such an amount has been debited to your account, and as such we will be knowing the exact balance in our account. Then next benefit is e-banking provides 24 hours 365 days year service to the bankers, customers of the bank. So anytime we want to make payment, we can make the payment at any time of the day, any time of the year. Then customers can make some of the permitted transactions from office or house or while traveling through mobile phones. So with the help of the mobile phones, we can make the payment or receive payment anytime we need. That is even when we are traveling also. Then next, it inculcates a sense of financial discipline by recording each and every transaction. So whatever transaction we do over the digital mode, so it will be recorded, and if the customer demands, it can always be printed and given to the customer. So there is greater satisfaction by offering unlimited access to the bank, not limited by the walls of the branch, and less risk and greater security to the customer as they can avoid traveling with cash. Now there is greater customer satisfaction. Now why the customer is very satisfied? Because he can always avail all the banking services at his house itself, and even if he has to make any payment, he need not carry cash. He can just make the payment through the mobile phones, and as such where this has become very convenient both for the banker and the customers also. Then now let us have a look into the benefits of e-banking to the banks. Now the first benefit is it provides competitive advantage to the banks. Then the second benefit to the banks is it provides unlimited network to the bank, and it is not limited to the number of branches. So all the banks all over India are well connected on the internet, and they are, because of this greater connectivity, the interbank transfer of funds has become very easy. So from one bank to another, from one place to another, or any time of the day, it is possible because of the latest technology and because of the interconnectivity of the banks. And then because of this e-banking, the load on branches can be considerably reduced by establishing centralized database and by taking over some of the accounting functions. Now, because of this e-banking, the stress on the banks have been reduced to a very great extent. So, before the advent of this e-banking, all the functions had to be done manually by the banking personnel. But then nowadays, everything has become electronic and everything has become automatic, and as such, the pressure on the banks is low, and then most of the accounting functions also are taken over by this e-banking system, and as such the banking officials don't have much work to do in the banks. With this, we come to the end of this session. Hope you have all understood this. Thank you.